Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lords of Infinity. So, in the last episode, we managed to finally join the Ship Owners Club. It was a little dicey there for a second because, again, the way stats work in this game is a little different. So, again, it's a variety of things that kind of goes into play a lot of times, but we still managed to pull it off. And hopefully, we can start making some money and work our way onto this debt here because, my God, it is nonsense. And we also are losing 297 crown a turn. So we need money. We need money immediately. So we definitely need to look at some ways to start working on this and being able to, at least get into the positive. That's kind of the main goal right now. I will take out a loan if I absolutely have to, but I'm trying to avoid that until we at least start getting into some of these factions. Because as I can see here now, yes, I am a Knight of the Red, but beyond that, I'm not really in any good graces with the Royalist faction or the Wolframite faction. Um, yeah, or even Grenadier Square. So that would have turned into a disaster if I tried to get a loan. And then there's also the Ship Owners Club, where again, I don't have any type of sway there. So nothing is going for me right now other than I'm a decorated soldier who's been through hell and I'm broke. So I need to kind of work on that. But we did get an invitation from the Princess Royal. So let us see what she's up to and what she wants with us. The game is updated, restarting chapter. Oh, okay. Chapter 3, in which the Lord of the Courts finds himself embroiled in a political dispute of increasing delicacy and rancor. Certainly do not think any of you could do this in a court dress of the current fashion, not without getting stuck through with half a dozen pins. You shift a little in your high-backed chair, feeling quite egregiously out of place at Morwena Viscountess Ravenstall, as Morwena Viscountess Ravenstall makes wild contortions side to side at the waist, much to the delighted gasps of the half a dozen ladies clustered around her. Whatever you were expecting when you received an invitation to the Northern Keep, it wasn't the prospect of sitting in this intimate little neo-collegian chamber, watching one of the Queen Dowager's ladies in waiting show off a scandalously cut new dress to a cluster of her peers. For a moment, Lady Ravenstall seems to bask in the approval of her friends, but her smile fades near instantly as an almost cadaverously thin figure rises from her seat at the other side of the chamber, her auburn hair tied back into a severe governess's bun, and her lips pursed with disapproval. It's silk, pronounces the Princess Royal, with all the dire gravitas of an intendant condemning a man to hang. Lady Ravenstall answers with a look of almost complete confusion. Of course it's silk, Izzy. Almost all court dresses are these days. Is there something wrong with that? I cannot say I approve of importing Kian silks, the princess replies concernedly. Not when half the cotton fields in Warburton lie fallow for want of profitable use, and the price of linen is half what it was 3 years ago. But cotton is so dull, and the dye never takes to linen right, Ravenstall protests. If only you could feel how freely I might move. Why, I could fight a battle in this dress. She turns to one of her companions, a familiar face in this small crowd of strangers. Ellie, surely one must appreciate that. But Eleonora, Countess Wells, only shakes her head. Izzy's right when Grenadier Square ordered 100,000 cotton uniforms under tunics a year for the army in Antar. With the war over, the demand is gone, and the cotton farmers have been the ones feeling the effects. They need relief more than we need to find ourselves more indebted to some Kian merchant house. And besides, she adds the twitch of a smile to take the sting out of her reply, if the soldiers of the king's army fight in cotton, I dare say I could too. Yet Lady Ravenstall remains undeterred. Her gaze darts from face to face, from one gentle look of disapproval to another, until her eyes meet yours. What does my lord think? She poses before you like a music hall showgirl. Surely one must admit that the silk does have a certain striking effect. You've heard more than once before that Viscountess Ravenstall is considered one of the most acknowledged beauties of Atorian society. From your perspective, you find yourself easily agreeing with that assessment, but you've attracted the attention of the room's other occupants too, their expression marked with civil yet obvious grins at your increasingly apparent discomfiture. Behind them, Princess Isabel seems less than amused. Indeed, she seems to await your answer with an almost deadly earnest. For fear of not pissing off the Princess Royal and, of course, the king, I'm going to side with the princess. So, um, let's see. Surely the material for a single dress cannot demand so harsh a judgment. Not going to say that. I fear Her Highness is right. We must consider the repercussions of even our personal decisions. Yeah. Lady Ravenstall settles into an indignant pout. It's a single dress. I fail to see how a single dress might bring down the whole of the linen trade. A single dress? No, it's far more than that. The princess spares a moment to offer you a look of satisfaction? Approval? What do you think the other ladies at court will do when they see the Black Pearl of Ravenstall wearing a daring new dress? Some will disapprove, of course, but I think most will apply to their own dressmakers immediately for a copy. It will become the fashion in Notoria overnight, and what is fashionable in Notoria will be fashionable in Havenport and Tannisburg next season. By the end of the month, a single dress will have become 1,000. By the end of the year, 100,000. Her voice comes at full force now, an orator's contralto filling the room like rolling thunder. 100,000 dresses. That might be 1.5 million crown. Would you rather that fortune be spent feeding the starving children of linen weavers and cotton pickers, or paying for the jade footstool of some kin merchant prince's 18th concubine? Lady Ravenstall sits back down with a look of defeat. Oh, very well. I shall try a sheer linen. She pouts, and I shall show up at court looking like an old cobweb, and everyone shall laugh at me. In an instant, the princess is by her friend's side, her demagogue's demeanor shed like a shawl. Oh, there's no need for such self pity, Win. I could make you wear a burlap sack, and you'd only need 5 minutes to turn it into something which would turn the head of every beau in the room. I never knew how to pronounce that one. The Viscountess offers a sly little grin. Oh, that would be easy. I would simply have to cut the right parts off. The princess smiles back as the room fills with a round of scandalized giggles. She settles back into her chair with a look of satisfaction. Now then, if that matter is settled. Then, you mentioned an article of interest in this morning's Observer. One wonders if. In Atoria, you found no subject of conversation more readily taken up than that of a question of which potentially scandalous answer. And of all the questions asked, none seemed to approach the potential of those pertaining to Princess Isabel's insular little circle. You spent enough time in Atoria to hear all the theories by now. They were a secret cabal, running the realm behind His Majesty's back, some said. They were a conspiracy plotting to they were a conspiracy plotting to overthrow the king and put his sister on the throne, said others. Other guesses tend towards even tawdrier territory. There was one passed around with lascivious relish that implied they kept the senior members of the royalist faction in thrall through the trafficking of their own charms. Another, no less salacious, asserted that the whole thing was nothing more than a cover for the supposed Takaran tendencies of the Princess Royal's sexual appetites, and that the other members of the circle were her clandestine lovers, each seduced into slaking her unnatural lust. You know how pissed I would be if I turned around and then, tried to have a romance with Wells or one of them, and then come to find out in book 15, after being a loyal servant this entire time, that she was actually romancing the queen and it was all for naught. I would be so pissed. As you sit among them, the truth seems almost a disappointment. True, the Princess Royal's companions come from among the most powerful and influential of the United Kingdom's families. True, their conversations quickly turns to matters of state, their discussions of problems and solutions edged with a ferocious intellectualism of the sort which you've rarely seen before. But in the end, they are exactly what they seem to be, a tight-knit group of gently born ladies enjoying each other's company over tea and cakes. Yet that simple answer seems only to raise more questions. A casual meeting of friends does not discuss matters of state with such deadly earnest as these young women do, nor would they speak so confidently of directing such matters themselves. And they certainly wouldn't have invited you here simply to listen to them speak of intendancy politics and shipping tariffs. Now then, I believe those are the pleasantries dealt with. One of the younger ladies, the Earl of Wethern's daughter, you believe, declares with a note of finality, pulling you back out of your thoughts. Shall we? Her eyes flick to you for just the barest moment. Shall we move on to pressing business? The princess fixes you with a sharp, probing look. No, she says after a moment's searching. Not yet. I believe our guest has a few questions for us first. Don't you, my lord? Um, is it normal to speak of matters of state like this? Uh, I guess. I mean, honestly, these aren't really that odd of questions. It's the princess. Naturally, I mean, she doesn't seem like she has anything else better to do, so I'm pretty sure she keeps well informed because, well, she has nothing else better to do. And she seems to be friends with, family and stuff like that, or the different families, so that doesn't make much sense. How much power does this assembly really have? I mean, again, one of her friends was working with intelligence during the war, so I'm not really surprised by this either. As far as is it normal to speak of matters of state like this? Granted, these are women in this time, but at the same time, again, the Princess Royal, I'm not sure anybody's going to do anything to her. So I'm not going to ask any of these questions. Um, Only one, Your Highness. Why am I here? The Princess Royal fixes you with a steady look, an experience which you seem to find distressingly similar to that of looking down the muzzle of a loaded pistol. You are aware that my brother, the king, has, through a great deal of negotiation, and in spite of much opposition, ordered the creation of a royal commission for the purpose of determining means to reform the army. I am, Your Highness, though I did not know the pains to which His Majesty went to ensure its existence. The princess nods coldly. And you are aware that the Duke of Wolfram and his allies in the courts have declared themselves against any initiative which may increase the crown's reliance on the current scheme of taxation, and thus stands opposed to any attempt at army reform. It's funny because this is true, but there's one that I did, one of my saves that I did briefly play. I think I ended up, because this is again with my modded save with all my money, I ended up buying like the biggest house in town. And buying the biggest house in town is the house that's in the Duke of Wolfram's kind of territory in the capital or whatnot. So no matter what, and then I think I ended up joining the Rendaware Club too as well. And then I got a visit from the Duke of Wolfram, and he still wanted me to join the commission, but I think he wanted me to sabotage the commission basically or whatnot. So it's just kind of interesting seeing both sides of that. But anyway, I try not to pop in with certain spoilers like that. It's certain things I do remember from that playthrough, but for the most part, I did just kind of breeze through it. Okay. So that's what this is all about. You nod, resisting the urge to smile. Her Highness believes the Duke of Wolfram is planning to somehow obstruct the Army Reform Commission. No, she replies flatly. I believe the Duke of Wolfram has already well begun the process of obstructing the Army Reform Commission, and that if he is to succeed, then all of the work which has been committed to its establishment will come to naught. A dire prospect for the king, you suppose. But what does that have to do with his sister, or you for that matter? We do not, of course, mean to allow this to pass unchallenged, the princess continues. And now we believe we have just the means at our disposal to offer a reply. What would those means be, Your Highness? Her lips curl into a wintry little smile. Why, you, my lord. Me, Your Highness? The princess nods. You are a soldier, my lord. My sources, she waves a hand at Countess Wales, seated beside her, inform me that you are a fighting officer of exceptional experience. More importantly, I believe that experience to have made evident in your mind the necessity of pursuing a reform of the king's army. You keep your expression carefully controlled. Better to wait for the Princess Royal to explain exactly what she means than to sit in obvious confusion, gulping like an idiot. The Duke of Wolfram is not a soldier, she continues. He possesses the self-awareness to see that, at least. Instead, he means to act through those of his allies who have already secured places on the commission, particularly the Earl of Castermain. Okay, that kind of scares me, because again, if I was one of the people that turned around and, sided with the Duke of Wolfram, she was already aware that I was pulling stuff. Good God. She fixes you with a steady look. We shall answer in kind. Once you are placed on the commission, you will act as one of our agents, working to ensure that it operates without undue interference. I wonder if that means she would use Casarosa or something like that. So far, so good, you suppose, save for the obvious problem. With respect, Your Highness, I fear that to secure a place on a royal commission as an individual of my current circumstances would be difficult. To sit on a royal commission is to secure one of the greatest privileges of all, to advise the king's majesty in confidence, something allowed only to the privy council otherwise. Naturally, seats on such bodies are reserved only for those possessing the greatest influence, wealth, or royal favor. They're not exactly handed out to poor country barons. Do not worry about that, my lord, the princess replies. Take our offer, and the seat will be arranged. The only question one need concern himself with is whether one means to accept. If I accept, what would your highness then require of me? Keep your eyes open, the princess replies. I'm told that Castermain has a reputation for caution. That might be used to our advantage. Discover his plans to obstruct the commission while they are not yet in train, and you shall have more than enough time to foil them. The Earl of Castermain is a man of wealth and standing, not to mention a soldier of no small stature, you point out. He has a great many friends, both among the Duke of Wolfram's faction and at Grenadier Square. Would one be safe in assuming that I shall not be required to oppose him alone? The princess's lips curl into a grin. One may, my lord. I dare say that one who has commanded a squadron of cavalry in battle will find the task of rallying like-minded peers to the defense of army reform easy enough, and one might similarly rest assured that he would not be the only one acting upon my behalf. Your eyes flick quickly towards Countess Wells, your gaze lingering just long enough to see her offer you an almost imperceptible nod. So this is not the Princess Royal's only gambit. You suppose you should have figured as much. That only leaves one remaining issue to be settled. What of the commission itself, you ask? Shall I be required to support a certain position? The princess replies with a look of genteel amusement. Assuming Wolfram's hands are kept out of it, you may support whatever position that pleases you, she shakes her head. The martial sciences are your field of expertise, not mine. No doubt your years of active service have provided you with no shortage of proposals to improve the workings of the king's army. It would be remiss of you not to present them. So the princess intends for you not only to act as her agent within the Army Reform Commission, but to do the full work of a commissioner as well. Her Highness asks a great deal of me. I am not ignorant of the value of my offer, she replies simply, and I do intend to make the most of it. I'm sure Wolfram means to obstruct the commission. What reason does your highness have to support army reform? The princess's eyebrow raises. Is it not enough to know that I do support it? You shake your head. Not if I'm to be your agent. If I'm to act on your behalf, then I must know that your ends will not weigh on my conscience. The Princess Royal makes a quiet little sound, almost like a quiet ah, like that of a detective who has solved a vexing mystery only to find the answer less exciting than expected. I believe Tierra to be on the verge of a time of great turmoil, she explains. By defeating Antar in battle, we have proven ourselves equal to one of the great powers. Now we must defend our gains from those who would be our enemies, by deterrence if possible, by fire and steel if necessary. For that, we shall need a strong army. We do not have Takar's riches or Kian's multitudes, but we do have one advantage, the fact that we have just recently fought and won a substantial war. If we do not take advantage by learning and applying its lessons, we would be throwing away our best chance of securing a better place for ourselves and our countrymen. She sits back. Does that satisfy you? You nod. Whether it's a good answer or not, you cannot say for sure, but it is a sincere one. It does, Your Highness. Good. On the one hand, I do agree with her on that, but and I do think that the army does need to be, reformed and everything, but I would also argue that this country is really screwed. Like, it's really hard to kind of think about like what the United Kingdom is kind of comparable to in our timeline because they're not even really comparable. I guess in a way they're kind of comparable to the United States, but the United States was always kind of different and always kind of had advantages because we had a whole country to discover in the process, and we got a lot of advantages from that. But yeah, I mean, it was still kind of yeah, I guess it could be similar to them, but it just seems like a bad idea for some of this stuff. It's very shaky ground. Like if I was them, I would try to do everything I can to not get into another war. But I guess she's acknowledging that, like, yeah, we might end up in another war, so we need to do everything we can. But also, you spent a lot of money on this war. So I don't know. It's a lot. But I can also see the point of, the military commission. I do agree with what they're doing. It's just at the same time, like I would probably be bending over backwards trying to do everything I can to pull some type of political favor where I got to deal with Takar or something like that, so I don't have to worry about them. But, I accept, Your Highness. The princess nods, the bear's hint of a smile on her lips. I was hoping you would. She nods to one of the ladies at her side, who quickly steps forward with a curious looking writing table, already furnished with inkpot, pen, candle, and a stick of wax. She reaches under her petticoat to pull a piece of thick, heavy paper from her pocket, then unfolds it atop the little table before stepping back. What's this, you ask, peering at the little arrangement, obviously prepared ahead of time. It's an assurance, the princess replies. I would like there to be no misunderstandings about the nature of our agreement. You take a closer look. So it is, complete with a space for your signature at the very bottom. Part of you bristles at the implication carried in those nearly lettered articles. Are you considered so untrustworthy as to be required to sign a contract like some sort of tradesman? Must I put my signature to paper? You ask, feeling somewhat attacked at the lack of trust. Is the word of a gentleman not enough? One of the ladies to the princess left fixes you with an amused look. If one thinks that, then clearly one has clearly been luckier dealing with such gentlemen than I. The room fills with scandalized giggles and the sound of fluttering fans. You sign the document, color rising in your cheeks as you quickly melt the wax over the document and stamp the arms of your house into the resulting blob. An impression of your signet ring. The same young lady who brought the table now takes it away, handing the newly signed document to the Princess Royal, who nods with a certain finality as she folds the paper up and slips it into her own pocket. She stands, a signal for the rest of the room to do the same. I believe our business is concluded. As a body, the princess and her ladies retreat from the room, gracefully drifting away like a receding tide, all except one. I must apologize for when, Countess Wells begins as she takes a step towards you. She is a most outrageous flirt, but she did not mean anything by it, I am sure. The last time you saw the Countess of Wales was at the aftermath of Second Caringia. She'd been dressed as a soldier then, in a lancer's tight-fitting frog jacket and breeches. She fought as a soldier that day, though her official purpose was solely to observe the progress of the war on Grenadier Square's behalf. Her clothing had been all covered with mud and gore, and the saber you thought she only wore as an affectation was dripping with blood. Now she wears a court dress of deep blue and a great spray of pearls across her neck, her face made up to be smooth and flawless, her chestnut hair curled carefully and pinned up in the latest fashion. Were it not for the familiarity of her voice, you might have taken her for someone entirely different, but there's no mistaking her now. Her eyes sparkle with recognition as the same familiar intensity spreads across her freshly remembered features. Oh, but it's good to see you again, she exclaims, taking another step closer, stopping only short of taking your hand in hers. It has been far too long, my Lord Roomberg. Uh, Interesting that I can say that. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm just gonna say it's good to see you as well. So, and of course, if I could have romanced her, would have had that. The Countess smiles. I'm glad the feeling has been mutual. She shakes her head. I must apologize. 3 years since we saw each other last, and I have only sent a single letter. You must think me the most wretched scrub. It is as you said in your letter, my lady, you reply. You remain in the king's service, and I cannot expect you to throw over your duty for the sake of friendship, any more than I might expect it out of a brother officer. You smile. Her smile grows wider. That is very kind of you, my lord, though I must warn you that duty rests its heavy hand on me still. It was difficult enough to find the time for today, and she looks over her shoulder to where the Princess Royal awaits her, and I fear I do not have much of it left to spend. Let me see. Wolfram, the king, her highness, where do you stand? I stand in the same place I always have, Wales replies simply. Facing forward. That is not quite the sort of answer you had meant to receive. Forward, my lady? We live in a rare and fortunate time, my lord, where the things our fathers and grandfathers have taken as certainties have been swept away by the tide of history. In its place, we have a chance to build something new, something better. Wells' eyes sparkle with a distant vision as her voice crackles with a passionate fire. Wolfram and his allies defend the old order, like a builder who insists on laying brick even as the foundation shifts under him, as if that might make things as they once were. The king chooses to build anew. I know where my loyalties lie. A new world, then? You think to the gas lamps in notorious streets, to the king's army returning home from the first overseas war in Tierra's history, to Wales herself standing on a battlefield, her saber dripping red with the blood of her enemies. Yes, I suppose it is. Times are changing, the Countess concludes. We must side with those willing to change with it. Suddenly, she trails off, as if answering some signal that only she can hear. She peers over her shoulder again at the Princess Royal's expectant expression as she waits by the door. Forgive me, I have to go. I wish. She pauses for a moment as she searches for the words. I wish we had longer. I'm not going to say that. Perhaps we may speak again sometime. Wells nods eagerly. Eagerly, Jesus. Yes, I will see you at the Army Reform Commission, won't I? The first meeting will be in 3 weeks. Yes, you shall, you reply. Perhaps we may speak at further length there. The Countess trails off for a moment, weighing your words before nodding again. Yes, I would like that. She steps back, offering you a little curtsy as she does. Then she's gone, withdrawing to the company of the Princess Royal. So I wonder if you don't romance Wales in Guns of Infinity, but you don't romance anybody else, and you choose to not get married, can you still romance her now if you kind of build it up? Because a lot of this dialogue is also the same dialogue I had when I tried to romance her or when I continued the romance on my modded save. So I'm a little curious about this. Not curious enough to go back and replay all this, but I am curious. A liveried royal footman leads you back through the corridors of the northern keep, out of the annex containing the royal apartments and towards the Lord's course, where your coach awaits. Once or twice, as you follow the serving man through the sober, granite-floored halls of the intendancy wing, harried-looking clerks pass you by, their hands invariably loaded down with folios and ledgers. It is an almost sobering thought to remember that for all of its palatial stylings, the Northern Keep is still a building of business, the working headquarters of His Majesty's government. To the men and women who regularly inhabit its halls, the Northern Keep is no more than the equivalent of a shop counter or a carpenter's table. Yet to you, who has never had the chance to wander freely through the building before, it is quite a marvelous edifice. More than once you drag your guide off on a detour to some room you've heard of before, only in childhood stories. There's the Montjoy room, where hang the regimental colors of Caleb the Cruel's vanquished army. The Varsovian pool, which Edmund II populated with imported to Karen Koi at great expense. The Gallery of Plenty, its walls lined with the frescoes of the unified kingdom's many manufacturers and exports, all rendered in minute detail. And there is the Armoral Hall, of course. You spend quite some time there, gawping like a tourist at the painted shields lined up along the walls and vaulted ceilings, one representing each house with a seat on the courts. Your eyes go from the massive, ornate ducal arms of the candleless, or the, yeah, candlelesses of Wolfram and the Harrises of Warburton, to the smaller shields of the Marquises, the Earls, the Viscountess, and then finally the tiny carved crests of the baronial houses, lined up in vast profusions. You recognize a few of them, even though each is barely the size of your hand. There's Rays and Red March and Slane and Hawthorne, and yes, there's yours, hanging from a dark corner, forgotten save by the touch of some servant's long handled broom. Part of you had wanted to come to Otoria to change all that, to make a mark in politics, just as you did on the battlefield. Looking at that tiny crest in that dark corner, you know you won't be able to do it through the courts alone, not as one voice among 600. Perhaps the Princess Royal's offer will allow you the chance. If the Army Reform Commission succeeds and its recommendations are adopted, then your work might be remembered by generations of Tyrian soldiers to come. It is a heady prospect, but it is also a weighty one. It may be your judgment alone that decides whether those soldiers will bless or curse your name. Their lives may depend upon the word which you have agreed to do, not just those of a squadron or a regiment, but a whole army. Your successor is stretching out in endless ranks into the unknown future. It is a notion that clings to you as your coach rattles its way back to your townhouse. It is a thought which weighs heavily upon your mind as the days before the opening of the courts pass, one by one. It's funny that, my character thinks like this, thinking about all the things that he can do in the future with this commission. And it's just like, my guy, you also are responsible for winning one of the greatest battles in the United Kingdom's history. You've already made a gigantic mark, with just that. You're going to be remembered just for that. But yeah, I guess I don't know. It's kind of interesting how your character looks back at the war as not being as being a big deal, but also not being that big of a deal. It's just like a thing that happened. You heard stories as a child of what the opening of the courts was like under jolly old Edmund IV, of how the lords have paraded into the chamber in the bright-colored frippery, so fashionable at the time, to the blare of trumpets and clouds of rose petals, of how young hotheads would use even the slightest pretext to challenge each other to duels on the chamber floor, of how the old king sipped brandy as he lounged upon the griffin throne, and made merry with his mistresses as they jeered or applauded debates from the galleries. To your young mind, it had seemed very fine, a party that never ended and never paused, save to consider some matter of state with only the finest of spirits and the best of good humor. There is none of that today. Today, the opening session of the courts proves a sober, almost somber thing, with men filing through the double doors in their black coats and presenting themselves before the straight-backed, unsmiling presence of the King's Majesty before quietly taking their seat. The air seems thick and heavy, weighing down your thoughts with every sodden breath, rendering your mind sluggish and clammy like dishwater soaking a rag. Those around you feel it too. The benches are half full today. more than there were at your investiture last year. Yet the men around you seem almost asleep, their eyes glazed over. Even the king seems less vibrant than the time you saw him last, his auburn hair hanging limp under his coronet as he holds Packmaker in his hands and commands the opening of the courts with a drowning, exhausted voice. Only one figure seems fully alert today, and he all but leaps from the bench the instant the sword of state is taken from the king's fingers. You feel something tense up in the small of your back as the figure makes his way before the throne. Your Majesty, His Grace the Duke of Wolfram requests permission to present a motion to the chamber. Oh, great. At long last, the chamber begins to bestir itself as the Duke of Wolfram makes his way to the center of the aisle. All around you, your fellow lords rise as if from a slumber, whispering urgently to each other, throwing glances at their allies, their enemies, and the Duke himself, as he at last begins to speak. I thank you all, my lords, for giving me the pleasure of being the first to present a motion in this new session of the courts. Wolfram begins, his voice somber. Today ought to be a day of joy, a day to celebrate the rights and freedoms which we have the fortune to live under, a day to take pride in our most fair and liberal system of governance, which allows us to so ably aid and advise our gracious sovereign. A handful of your fellow lords murmur polite approval as they nod, but most sit with silent apprehension. They know what must be coming next. Yet how can one be happy on this day, knowing of the crisis which has gripped our realm? Wolfram's voice pitches up, his words filling with a slow and steady swell of righteous anger. Not 4 months ago, the streets of Vittoria were piled with the bodies of those who had perished for want of food and shelter. The streets of Vittoria, and the streets of Tannisburg, too, I must admit. How could one celebrate, knowing his countrymen lay dead, not at the hand of a foreign enemy, but in the cold grasp of poverty and starvation? How could any of us know that the state of our realm has driven honest men to brigandage and thievery, and feel any sentiment but shame? More murmurs now, some of them angry. Perhaps some of your fellows thought Wolfram would have moderated his position over the winter. Now it is clear, if anything, it has grown even harder. These are dire times, my lord, more dire than any which have ever darkened this chamber. His voice carries with it a terrible momentum, filling the chamber like a cannonade. The normal procedures have proven wanton, and when ordinary measures fail, it becomes one's duty to propose the extraordinary. Wolfram reaches into his jacket. The whole chamber seems to hold its breath. He pulls something loose and raises it high over his head, a piece of paper. His Grace the Duke of Wolfram presents the following motions for immediate vote: that the war taxes be ended, that the expenditure for the king's army be cut by 3/4, and that any further discussion of the additional public spending be forbidden for the period of the next 5 years. You had thought the chamber quiet before, now it's completely silent. This is not done. While Wolfram may have done nothing wrong in theory, it is an unspoken law that only the Chancellor of the Exchequer may present a budget to the chamber. That is his prerogative, and has been ever since the courts existed. And that isn't even to mention the content of the motion itself, not only to reduce the funding of the king's army to such a state that it would almost certainly cease to exist in its current form, but to prevent any further spending for the next 5 years. It's unheard of, inconceivable. It's simply not. The Earl of Castlemaine stands from his seat. I second the motion. Third, calls out another, the Marquis of Carricourt. The silence breaks. The chamber goes mad. Suddenly, the air is filled with 200 shouting voices. Accusations, recriminations, appeals, and insults fly like musket balls in open battle. You think you might have shouted something too, but you cannot be sure. So great is the cacophony that you cannot even hear yourself think, let alone speak. Order, someone shouts. Leaf, you think. Order in the chamber. You see him standing next to the throne. his expression turning swiftly from exasperation to annoyance. His hand reaches for the pistol at his belt. Only a shake of the king's head dissuades him. Instead, the two wait, with varying levels of patience, until the shouting finally begins to recede. The chamber has heard the motion, the king finally declares, his voice straining to be heard. Is it the pleasure of the chamber to endorse the motion? A vote, then. You can only hope this will resolve this issue one way or another. If this is typical politics, Wolfram is doing this knowing damn well this is going to fail, but he's just kind of making his position known. He's going to make sure that this is going to fail, but it does help his cause because it's going to anger certain people, and it's going to let this be known that this is kind of the thing, and he's going to be talking about it from now until hell freezes over. Okay, so let's see. The king's government must help the king's subjects, whatever the cost. I vote in favor. Nope. A reputation as Wolfram's ally will serve me well. I vote in favor. Nope, because I'm pretty sure he doesn't like me. Well, I don't think he doesn't like me. I think he just doesn't know anything about me. Yeah, nobody has an opinion of me yet. But it's time to make myself kind of, well, known. So, presenting myself as the king's ally now may prove profitable in the future. Against. Wolfram goes too far. I vote against. Either way, I don't really agree with Wolfram, so he goes too far. I vote against. Wolfram may believe he is doing the right thing. Perhaps he believes that justifies his unprecedented motion here today. You believe differently, for he has not only proposed a motion which would effectively leave the unified kingdom defenseless against any potential threat, while simultaneously seeking to constrain the king's right to authorize future spending. He has also done so in a manner which breaks with more than a century of established procedure. It is one thing to criticize the king's policy or advise against a course of action, but to cast aside established conventions of the courts for the purpose of dictating terms to the king's face is quite another. Wolfram may believe that the situation calls for dire and drastic action, but that doesn't mean you must agree with him, especially when it's clear from the general disposition of the chamber that his view is far from unanimous. So when those against the motion are called to stand, and the king's supporters rise from their benches, you join them. You catch a few approving nods as you stand, most of them men you had known in Nantar, rising in defense of the service which you fought as part of as you are Jesus Christ. Rising in defense of the service which you fought as part of for so long. You catch a few mutters from the Duke of Wolfram's supporters as well, less angry than disappointed, though you would have been rather shocked if they thought you'd have voted otherwise. But in any case, your decision is made and tallied, and no disapproving looks can unmake it now. I am kind of surprised that they don't kind of have like a secret ballot or something like that, but then again, I guess that also makes sense because I think in pretty much every government, it's always been a case of like, you just have to either literally say that you're for or against, or it's going to get tallied up some way or another. So, yeah. Thankfully, the motion fails by a bare margin of 14 votes. You can see the relief on the king's face as the votes are tallied. Even from where you're sitting, he won't have to resort to his veto today. You sit back in your bench with no small satisfaction. Now that the matter has been considered and rejected, surely it must be time to set aside and move on to other, less contentious matters. Oh, my sweet summer child. No such luck. It only takes moments for the Duke of Wolfram's supporters to pick up the banner once again and lead a fresh sally in defense of their chief's now defeated policy. Far from being dissuaded by the vote, they now all but line up to deliver fresh harangues to be answered with stiff opposition delivered at a full-throated roar. Before long, the chamber is engulfed in a whirl of shouts and reddened faces. So much for less contentious matters. And so it continues, day after day, morning and night, as the same points are presented and recapitulated and refuted and presented again. A circle of endless noise and furious declarations. All, you must assume, bound to go somewhere, even if only the saints seem to know where. Not even the club seems safe. Even there, all discussion seems to have devolved into the subject of Wolfram's budget, its strengths, its weaknesses, its motives, and its prospects. You begin to regard the approaching first meeting of the Army Reform Commission with some sense of anticipation, if nothing else because it gives you something to think about besides the budget. You count down the days until at last the moment comes when you shrug on the familiar comfort of your uniform jacket, buckle on your dress saber, climb into your coach, and give orders to be driven to Grenadier Square. And I got on the commission. Didn't even have to do anything to get there, except for join the princess's faction, and that's it. So the meeting place of the Army Reform Commission proves to be a room deep in the bowels of Grenadier Square. Part of you cannot help but wonder if the location was chosen for reasons of secrecy, or to keep what must be the manifestation of a deeply unpopular policy away from the public eye. Perhaps it's both. You have no illusions regarding the purpose of this first meeting. It is an orientation for the purpose of getting to know your fellow commissioners, nothing more. Yet when the grenadier corporal acting as your guide leads you through the double doors and into the spare, windowless room appointed for the commission's use, it only takes you a moment to realize that the matter at hand will be considerably more complex than you might have previously thought. The members of the commission have already split into 3 individual groups, each holding their own conversations away from the other 2. The groups closest to you seem composed mostly of cavalry officers, judging from the uniforms they're wearing. You recognize Lord Palliser, nearly half a head taller than most of his fellows, resplendent in lancer white and blue as if he were on parade. Lord Marcus de All Havenport is there too, his infantry officer's uniform jacket looking quite plain without his party-colored Kentari cloak. There are others too, all of them engaged in some heated conversation. The second group is no less animated, but it is the uniform of the regiments of foot which dominate here. Only 2 do not wear the burnt ochre sure, of the infantry. One is the Countess Wells, her pastel morning dress sticking out like a sore thumb amidst the spray of familiar uniforms. The other figure wears the sober waistcoat of a civil servant. You recognize him after a moment as William de All Elson, Baron Hawthorne, the father of your old friend Captain Elson, who disappeared leading a charge at Blagia, and had once been Undersecretary at War. Now, he is the senior civil servant involved in the commission. You suppose that makes him something like its leader after a fashion. There is little activity among the third bunch. They're the smallest group of all, even split betwixt cavalry and infantry officers, throwing sullen looks at one group or the other as they pass each other baleful comments in voices barely above a whisper. All of them carry the rank insignia of battalion or squadron officer on their collars. These men are relatively senior officers, clearly. However, there is only one their number you recognize, and he is the most senior of all. The graying, florid-faced Earl of Castermain commanded a brigade in Antar, where he possessed a reputation for patience and meticulous planning in his maneuvers. Now he is considered one of the Duke of Wolfram's staunchest allies. If the Princess Royal is to be believed, then Castermain is on the commission solely to obstruct it. Perhaps it might be worth your time to see how founded her suspicions are. 3 groups, clearly of very different characters. The question is, which do you approach first? Well, Palisars is probably going to be the easiest to get into. And then again, let me see, Hawthorne. Which one did they say Hawthorne was? The second one. Hawthorne would also probably be relatively easy to get into as well because the Countess Wells. Maybe I should go ahead and talk to Hawthorne first because of Countess Wells. Maybe that would make it easier to kind of get in there and talk to her. But then again, I haven't talked to Lord Palliser at all, so I kind of want to talk to Palliser right off the bat because I wanted to talk to him at the party initially, but you only get a couple choices. So, let's see what's going on with Wells, though. Baron Hawthorne and his group pay you little attention as you approach them. Instead, they're listening to one of their number, a major of the Grenadiers, by the looks of him, holding forth at some length with only the barest restraint. I think also another reason why I kind of want to talk to Wells too is because I was thinking about if that gun manages, if we do manage to make the gun, then one thing that I kind of believe is that cavalry will become a bit useless at that point. It kind of reminds me of, like I think around it might have been World War One, near the beginning. You know, there were still people that used heavy cavalry and stuff like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think most of those units got mowed down pretty quickly because of the introduction of not necessarily, I think, assault rifles, but at least rifles that can shoot a lot faster. So didn't work out too well for those cavalry and stuff like that. So that could be World War One. It might be towards either after World War One or into World War Two. Of course, World War World War One is where you had trench warfare and so on and so forth. But yeah, I feel like if we were to turn around and kind of focus on cavalry, we might be able to match some of these different nations and stuff like that. But if we manage to turn around and build a rifle that either has a clip in it and so on and so forth, or something else, God only knows what we'd be capable of. So I actually could spoil some of that because I do remember, again, my modded playthrough. I could kind of spoil how some of that went out, at least in that sense, but I won't. But I do kind of want to lean more towards infantry because I do think it might help out a little bit more than cavalry. Anywho, Baron Hawthorne and his group pay you little. I already did that. So I say to you that any future logistic corps must have its own regimental establishment, complete with its own colors, kernel, and traditions. Otherwise, they will have little incentive not to adopt the traditions and idiosyncrasies of the regiments they are assigned to wholesale, until the point where each regiment will once again have its own standard of supply and maintenance. Another officer, a spare graying fellow with the iron gray jacket facing of the engineers, shakes his head. After a moment, you recognize him as Lieutenant Colonel Diaz, the officer who was in charge of the siege of Caringia. It is all well and good to say that a logistic corps must be embodied as a regiment, but I must be obliged to ask to the caliber of gentlemen such a regiment would attract when it offers little chance for advancement or glory. The engineers are the same. I dare say that the new officers I receive would astound you with the extent of their ignorance and indolence. It is only with the greatest exertion that we can make anything useful of them at all. When we really want such fellows in charge of the army's ability to feed and supply itself. Perhaps there is a middle way, a new voice interjects. Lady Wales, you have all read my recommendations for the development of a school for the instruction of staff officers. Why not consider a similar institution for officers of the logistics corps? Even if, suddenly she looks up directly at you. Oh, Lord Broomberg, she exclaims brightly. How good of you to have come. Please, allow me the honor of introducing you. A round of introductions follow. Most of the men present seem to know you already, by reputation at least. It doesn't take long for them to introduce themselves. Now then, Lady Will continues, we were discussing the formation of a permanent logistics corps. I hope one has no objections that such a possibility be examined by the commission. Forgive me for asking, but is a permanent logistic corps really necessary? It is. Necessary, Hawthorne replies incredulously. Sir, I dare say it's vital. If there is any singular lesson that the war in Antar has taught us, it is that the current system is absolutely disastrous. One might even make bold enough to say that it was a saint's damned miracle that we won the war at all, with the shambles our systems of supply were. Yeah, it is really surprising. Were things really so bad, you ask? They did not seem so at the time. The other baron shakes his head. They were an absolute mess. Individual regiments were scrambling to provide supplies which should have been arranged by the staff of the commander-in-chief. who in turn were completely lost making up for the mistakes made here in Grenadier Square. The first winter in Antar, half the army didn't even have winter greatcoats. In the winter of 610, the entire King's division ran out of firewood. Could you imagine that? And yeah, why would, okay, that was a dumb question by me, because even I had to turn around and pay for lodgings for my or I think I did, at least in that playthrough, that I had to pay for lodgings for my own soldiers and stuff like that because there were none. So, it's really dumb how they have this whole thing where you have to pay for commissions and stuff like that. You're impoverishing your own soldiers. Like, that's not going to work. You don't have to. You were there on both occasions, and the very mention of those cold days brings a chill to your bones. Such shortfalls are really not normal then. Hawthorne shakes his head again, harder this time, as if animated by the very injustice which he describes. The staff of any Takarian general who bungled things so thoroughly would have likely been obliged to commit suicide on the spot. The Kian or the Medozi would have been no less harsh. Only in our own army might such absolute failures of organization be considered anything close to normal. That comes as something of a shock to you. Your time in Antar was marked by a long and constant series of supply issues, insufficient food, a shortfall of fodder, late pay, decrepit equipment. But after years of enduring such trials, you had simply filed them away as part of the everyday hardships of war. To learn that they had been considered by men like Hawthorne to be the result of grossly inefficient systems of supply is surprising, and more than a little infuriating. So you understand now, I trust. Hawthorne concludes, having obviously read the look on your face. Never again are we demand the king's soldiers to go to war without a unified and coordinated logistics corps to keep it fed and supplied. If we are to build a new sort of army, then we must start there. And again, this kind of leads me to the whole World War I, World War II thing, because that was a really big thing in World War I and World War II, was that it became more about logistics and supplies and, getting those supplies to soldiers and getting soldiers to the right spots and getting them well organized and so on and so forth to pull off some ridiculous, invasions and stuff like that. So, a new sort of army, sir. Quite so, Hawthorne replies. A new sort of army organized among rational lines. Its parts are designed to work together in totality and bring as many men to the field of battle as possible, whilst ensuring they are supplied, fed, and equipped to a uniform standard. This current disordered conglomeration of private armies and self-interested nobles may have served Edward the Strong's purpose during the wars of unification, but the war in Antar has shown that we cannot afford to rely upon any further. The current system seems to have worked all right in Antar, you reply. Surely you exaggerate. Oh my God. This is another one of those situations where I kind of wish my dialogue was colored by my intelligence and also what I actually went through. Like, you've seen the Takarian army march. You've heard about the way they do things. You've heard about the way that they're organized and stuff like that. Yeah, we won against the League Congress, but it's plainly clear that we won against the League Congress because they're completely disorganized, and in a similar fashion to us, they have all these different princes and stuff like that. But they put up a large fight because, again, they're wealthy and they kind of can afford to turn around and do certain things, and they have a borderline or basically a slave population too. That didn't help either. But yeah, we only won because they're pretty similar to us and we're slightly more organized than them. There's no way in hell we would win a war against Takara or anything like that. Like, come on, man. The other baron lets out a derisive snort. I dare say I understate the problem wholly. The king maintained over 60,000 men under arms at the height of the war in Antar. Did you know that? 60,000. When the king could barely muster a third that number to face off against Prince Corobir before the walls of Caringia, half of you wants to ask where exactly the rest of those 60,000 were. The other half has already figured it out. You mean to tell me that the 20,000 or so men mustered at the Second Battle of Caringia were all that could be spared out of a force 3 times that number, with the rest lost to administrative inefficiencies? It may surprise you to know that nearly a third of those soldiers weren't even in Antar at all, Lady Wells interjects. For every battle, for every battalion or squadron each regiment had in Antar, another was likely as not still in Tierra, either stranded for want of transport or necessary equipment, or performing recruiting duties for their individual regiments, a task which might have been more profitably accomplished with a single centralized system. Hawthorne nods grimly. So you see, my lord, we fought Prince Corbury with one hand tied behind our back. I dare say we only won because of blind luck. We cannot think that we shall beat our next opponent in the same old way. You won't. Not to mention, I can only imagine that Takara probably has, intelligence people here and stuff like that. So if you combine intelligence people with, an organized army, good lord. And you've already barely won a war. You're dealing with, a population that's probably on the verge of rioting and stuff like that. Good lord. I kind of wonder to a certain degree if, like, maybe even Wolfram, maybe he's kind of motivated by maybe a Takara agent nudging him or something like that, trying to get them to cause chaos so Takara can invade or one of the other countries can invade. Okay, do the other groups think as you do, Palisar and Castamane? Viscount Palisar means well, Hawthorne replies after a moment of thought. I'll not have it be said that his commitment to reforming the army and improving its effectiveness in the field is any less than ours. He's certainly thrown himself into the task with great enthusiasm. Then why not work with him, you ask, noting the rather obvious fact that the Lancer officer and his supporters are wholly on the other side of the room. Surely if you both compromise here or there, achieve more together. Because he is too much the cavalry officer, Hawthorne snaps before realizing who he's speaking to. No offense, my lord. I merely mean to say that Lord Palisar has great difficulty seeing beyond the point of his lance. All of his bright ideas for reforming the fighting units of the army will be for naught if they cannot be properly supported by efficient systems of supply and administration. Yet Palisar is too fixed on what is before him to see what is behind. He shakes his head with a sigh of exasperation. He has spurred himself to a gallop, and he will not rein in to take a broader view of the situation unless someone stops him. I fear you may be underestimating him, my lord, Lady Wells interjects. I've known Palisar for some years now, and I believe him more perceptive than you give him credit for. He plays the part of the feather-brained cavalier fair enough, but he did not rise to lieutenant colonelcy of the Lancers by obstinacy and impetuosity, whatever. Alone, I assure you. Good lord, just say words. Just say normal. This is that time period. These words, the way they speak, we ain't doing that today. Maybe you'll find it in the House of Commons in the UK, but Jesus, not here. Most of the people here in the United States don't even know how to speak English, and that's the senators and stuff. Jesus. The way they talk sometimes is just like like there was that video of Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about how bad math was and stuff like that, and couldn't even get some numbers out. It's just like, come on. Hawthorne nods, trying his best and failing to hide a scowl. I hope you're right, my lady. What of Castamane, then? If anything is clear, it is that the Earl of Castamane is entirely opposed to the very concept of reforming the army, Hawthorne states. Yet I believe that he may be negotiated with under the right conditions. Forgive me, my lord, but those two statements seem diametrically opposed to one another. Castamane's opposition to the commission is founded upon the same assumption as the opposition of his principal, the Duke of Wolfram, that any attempt at reform will necessarily oblige the crown to increase its expenditures, Hawthorne explains. Do you understand what I mean? You nod. If Castamane's sole objection is purely upon grounds of expenditure, then any suggested reform which might lead to a reduction of costs may obtain his support. Hawthorne does not nod back, but he does offer you a grim little smile. Exactly so, my lord. I think I'd best speak to the others as well. Hawthorne nods. Of course, my lord, as you like. It was good to see you again, my lord, Lady Wells adds with a faint little smile. I give you joy of the day. And you as well, my lady, you reply with a smile of your own. If you will excuse me. You return to the center of the room. You're not sure if it's the heat of the summer or some other cause, but you find yourself feeling rather fatigued. Looking around, you don't think you're the only one either. It may be necessary to choose the next group you would wish to speak with carefully. Judging by the way things are going, you may not have a chance to choose another. On the one hand, I kind of want to speak to Palisar, but then on the other hand, I kind of want to speak to the Earl of Castermain because I kind of feel like if anything pops off, maybe if I have earlier contact with him, I might be able to dissuade him from certain things. But then on the flip side of that, then maybe Palisar would just turn around and end up betraying me or something like that. So, I think I'll just kind of focus on getting what I can. And then that's also the other thing too. Like they just mentioned, if we had some way of reducing the cost of certain things, the Earl of Castlemaine might be considering it. And one of the things that I want to do is get guns to our people and stuff like that, which is going to require some investment. So I'm pretty sure he's not going to be, going along with that. So I'll stick with Palisar. It's probably better in this situation. You approach Lord Palisar's group to find the man himself well into the process of holding forth on a topic which he quite clearly has a very strong opinion on. As far as I'm concerned, it just ain't feasible, he exclaims as some of his fellows nod in agreement. All well and good to tell a battalion officer that he got full freedom to act on his orders, but it ain't do him no good if he's blundering about blind and deaf, eh? A sizable body of foot needs scouts to give him a way to know what the enemy's at. Oh God, it's this guy. Why does he talk like this? Otherwise, it don't matter what commands he allowed to give. It's like to be a wrong one. If a lack of scouts is the problem, why don't we give him some? A bright-eyed major in a line cavalry officer jacket asks. Put a troop of horse with each battalion. Have them do the scouting work. This time, the answer comes in a light Centauri burr wrapped with a faint incredulity. You would have colonels of the foot burdened with the cost of training and equipping cavalry, as well as infantry, to command 2 regiments instead of 1. Mount some of the infantry then. The cavalry major replies undeterred. Train half a company in each battalion to act as mounted scouts. All we need is to give them horses. Palisar gives the speaker a dubious look. Horses and raiments and fodder and tack and all the men needed to maintain it. He shakes his head. No, it'd be a nightmare to supply. Ain't do it at all. It'd have to be scouts on foot, a company of quick men in loose order, moving in pairs. Say 1 in each battalion. What? The major's mouth is already half open in reply when his eyes catch upon you. And you are? Before you can answer, Lord Marcus steps forward. Lord Rumberg, he says, half as greeting and half as introduction, his voice pleasant. How fortunate we are to have a man of your experience on this commission. Again, you are subject to a round of introductions, a rapid procession of ranks, regiments, and names. Most introduce themselves readily enough. They've heard of you already, it seems. Only a few genuinely have no idea who you are, and it doesn't take long for you to enlighten them. I'm afraid you'll have to make a bit of a turn about the room to introduce yourself to the others, Palisar says, apologetically. Seems the commission's already had a bit of schism, what? What was it you were discussing before about scouts? Sorry. We were discussing a method of increasing the authority delegated to officers in command of individual companies or battalions. Lord Marcus explains.
It is our hope that if a battalion possesses the means to conduct its own reconnaissance, it will no longer be required to operate in company with units of horse, and thus its commanding officers will possess more freedom of action. And you mean to establish companies of light infantry within each battalion for that purpose, you ask. Aye, that is one possibility, the Kintari nobleman replies. Under current circumstances, the commander of a battalion of foot must call upon a unit of horse to scout for the enemy and engage in pickets. As a result, he must necessarily remain close to the cavalry. If we were to establish a force of skirmishers in each battalion to fulfill the same roles, they may move more freely, operating in areas where the use of cavalry may be impractical or otherwise impossible. It's a clever solution, you must admit, but you can spot one problem with it almost immediately. The dragoons exist almost entirely for the purpose of scouting and skirmishing. You note with some tone of grievance. Do you mean to render my regiment redundant? Hardly that, my lord, hardly that, Palisar interjects. If the infantry can look after themselves, then that frees your dragoons from the job of escorting them about and gives them more of a shot to take the fight to the enemy. Speaking as a cavalryman myself, I dare say that'd be damn welcome, what? He gets a round of approving nods for that, and a few amused chuckles, too. The infantry are free to plod about as they please, and we're free to make the most of our own advantages. Goes with the basic principles, what? You mentioned basic principles. What do you mean? It means, in plain speech, making the fighting parts of the army more effective, Palisar replies simply. There ain't nothing wrong with the system of the army at its heart. It's only that the parts that have to fight ain't being used to their full advantage. What we mean to do is to allow the battalions and squadrons facing the enemy to do so more effectively. And how do you mean to do that? It means making individuals, battalions, and squadrons more versatile, and giving the men in charge of those battalions and squadron the authority to do what they see as best without having to run to higher command to beg for support, Palisar explains. We're thinking to revise the manual of arms and individual training for the common soldier, to increase levels of readiness and drill at the company and troop levels, to introduce this sort of new tactics the experimental corps and your own dragoons played about within Nantar. Oh God, reading his hymn is terrible. You nod, thinking you understand now. In short, you mean to focus our efforts on reforming those parts of the army most directly involved in fighting the enemy. Palisar smiles. Well, you ain't ready a lance for war by sharpening its butt, eh? So I guess I just need to think of him as sounding like the detective, that annoying ass detective from Peaky Blinders in the first couple seasons. Let's see. What is your opinion of the other groups? Oh God, this is. Oh God. Palatar takes a moment to consider his response. Lord Hawthorne's got a few interesting ideas, I think. One we ought to consider, perhaps. We share the same goals, at least. And yet you have moved into separate orbits because he's a clerk. Another Lancer officer replies contemptuously. A miserable little desk helmsman who's never smelled powder smoke in his life. He thinks wars are won with wagons and schedules and numbers on charts, as if those of us who actually have to do the fighting are wooden blocks on a map. Lord Palisar gives you an apologetic look and directs one at Hawthorne's back for good measure. Not the way I'd put it, but that's the right of it, I'm afraid. Hawthorne's ideas are all well and good, but it ain't much use organizing an army if the soldiers don't fight well. You nod. Palisar has a point there. What of Castlemaine, you ask? The Lancer officer purses his lips in thought for a moment. I'd duck that one. Quite clear he ain't willing to accept any sort of change what requires increases in spending, so I ain't sure what he's doing here. Do you think he means to obstruct the commission? Palisar frowns. I ain't know to be sure. It would certainly seem so, but if he wants to scupper the commission, there's better places to do it, what?
You mean like in the courts when the commission submits its reports? No matter what the Army Reform Commission actually decides upon, it will still need the approval of the courts to be funded. You have me exact, Palisar replies grimly. This commission ain't popular in the courts, and even if we do our utmost to rally sympathy and support, getting any of our reforms to pass would be a damn close run thing. If that's the case, then what is it he's doing here, you ask? At that, Palisar only shrugs. Damn me if I know what. If I did, I'd tell you. I suppose I'd best go. I suppose we all ought to soon enough, Palisar notes as he idly fans himself with one gloved hand. Damned hot in here, I say. Now that he brings it up, it does seem rather warm. The combination of thick military uniforms, an airless room, and the heat of an Atorian summer. Palisar himself has it worst of all. The elaborate frogging of his uniform drooping, and the white cloth under his armpits stained dark with sweat. Lord Marcus doesn't seem much better off under his infantry officer's jacket, but he still manages a smile of genuine warmth. I look forward to fighting alongside you again, sir, he says as he shakes his hand. He shakes my hand. These remind me of the times when I was in ROTC and just, oh man, like in the summertime, this is Alabama. It's hot as hell. And it's not like a normal hot. It's a dry, well, no, it's a muggy hot. It gets in your skin and your bones or whatnot. And here I am with my uniform on and my coat, and it's so freaking hot. It is so freaking hot. There's no way to avoid it because those uniforms are pretty thick when you got your dress coat on and everything. And it's just, oh God, it's terrible. As do I. Though I suppose we must handle our enemies here less roughly than in Antar, you reply with a grin of your own. Good day. This time, when you return to the center of the room, the commission is already on the verge of breaking up. You suppose it's for the best. It would have been impossible to remain in such sweltering conditions for much longer. It's hard enough to think straight now, let alone discuss matters of importance. You spend the final round of pleasantries and farewells nearly boiling in your own sweat and having pleasant memories for the first time of the bitter cold of the Antari winter. It comes as a profound relief when you're at long last able to make your escape to the marginally cooler air of the outside, and thence to the welcome shade of your coach. It is only when you've returned to your townhouse that you finally found yourself cool enough to think straight again, to reflect upon what you saw in that small, airless room in the bowels of Grenadier Square. You've seen how the battle lines are drawn now. 3 separate visions of what the king's army could be, and only time will tell whose vision, if any, will triumph in the end. Time and perhaps your own actions. Okay. So, I will go ahead and stop it right there. And then in the next episode, we'll go ahead and see what's going on. Looks like we have a vote in the courts, and we will pick up there. So, if you liked the video, like the video. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe. I have a lot of things on the channel, and I will have many other things in the future. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I will get to it as soon as I can. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.